Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Chenxing Han to discuss Be the Refuge, Raising the Voices of Asian American Buddhists, about which Tricycle Magazine has noted opens the door for deep and difficult conversations about race, religion, and representation. Chenxing Han is a Bay Area-based writer whose publications have appeared in Buddha Dharma, Journal of Global Buddhism, Lion's Roar, Pacific World, Tricycle, and elsewhere. She holds a BA from Stanford University and an MA in Buddhist Studies from the Graduate Theological Union. After studying chaplaincy at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California, she worked in spiritual care at a nearby community hospital in Oakland. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Ann Glieg. Ann is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Central Florida. She's the author of American Dharma, Buddhism Beyond Modernity, and she's published widely on contemporary Buddhism. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Be the Refuge or American Dharma from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hi, Christina. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi. Hi. So I'm so excited to be with you here, Chenxing, to talk about your beautiful and brilliant book. And I know that you were going to start by bringing some of the people into the room from the book.
That's right. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Anne, for joining me. It's just a joy and an honor. You know how much I admire and respect your work, both in and outside of academia. And this is, I think, our first time communicating, not via email or social media. The pandemic, unfortunately, thwarted our plans to meet up in Bangkok.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to thank Books and Books, Christina and Carolyn and Mitchell for helping organize this event. I wanted to thank Venerable Goku for letting people from the Tallahassee Chan Center know about this event. Thank Tricycle, the staff at Tricycle, for featuring an excerpt from today's conversation in an upcoming Tricycle feature. And also, I think most importantly, thank you to everyone in the audience. I wish we could see you. I wish we could be in the same room together, but so grateful that all of you are here with us and really looking forward to all your comments and questions as well. So I will read, I thought today, from just a short section of chapter 2 of the book, which is titled Belonging. Are you going to Techno Buddha this year? Aaron wants to know. Is that like Buddhist Geeks? I ask warily, thinking about his blog post on the Geeks inaugural conference 2 years ago. As the BG organizers described it, taking place July 29th through 31st, 2011, in Los Angeles, Buddhist Geeks, the conference, brings together some of the most exciting teachers, leaders, and thinkers from the US and beyond, as Buddhist Geeks continues its ongoing mission to discover the emerging face of Buddhism. With a vibrant program of presentations, workshops, performance, and participant-led elements, and its inclusive, non-denominational attitude, #BeGeeks11 will be the most innovative, energetic, and relevant event in the Buddhist world. We would love you to join us. Ever a champion of the adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, Aaron created a photo collage from the headshots featured on the conference website. The end result is a dead ringer for the collage Nora pointed to upon realizing that she associated Zen Buddhists not with Japanese Americans, but with white people. Aaron wasn't able to attend the Buddhist Geeks conference, but another of my interviewees was. I remember the first Buddhist Geeks conference held at my school in Los Angeles, titled The Emerging Face of Buddhism in America. I was drawn to its brand as a sangha for youngish, technology-minded Buddhists. Overall, I enjoyed the conference and valued the motivations of the organizers and participants. Yet I pointed out to the audience that there are actually multiple faces of Buddhism in America. And I didn't particularly see that embodied in the content or representatives at the conference. Some people became defensive, while others were receptive to my critique. I noticed that the following year, the conference was amended to a more inclusive title, The Emerging Faces of Buddhism in America. However, the presenters remain primarily Caucasian. Holly, a Vajrayana Buddhist practitioner of mixed Jewish and Japanese American heritage, emphasizes that these reflections are not born of malice. Her aim is to help Buddhist geeks be an ally to non-white Buddhists in accordance with the organization's own stated value of inclusivity. She hopes her feedback can promote public dialogue about the homogeneous representation and cosmetic fixes to American Buddhism's lack of diversity. In this case, adding the S in faces without noticeably diversifying the speaker lineup. In her study of the Buddhist geeks community, Ann Glieg mentions the lack of racial diversity at the organization's 2012 and 2013 conferences. Capturing the full range of American Buddhism's emerging faces, easier said than done. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a brilliant kind of passage to open the conversation with, because it really captures what you have done. You know, you say it's easier said than done, but you've produced this incredible text, which is behind me on my top shelf with a really beautiful cover that really, you know, really provides, you know, what was so needed both in, you know, I'd say the academy and also in practice communities of convert Buddhism. So I wanted to thank you. I'm such a huge fan of your book and your work. Okay, I've got so many questions for you. I don't know where to start. But let's start in just thinking about what inspired you to write the book. So one of the things that I really loved about the book, and there were so many things, but I really loved your transparency about, you know, why you wrote the book and also how it related to your own experience as a young Asian American Buddhist. As you know, we talk about this as autoethnography in the academy. And I know that you talk about that term as well in your book about using personal experience as part of, you know, the cultural phenomena that you're talking about. So I just love this kind of personal kind of academic movement in the book. And I wondered if you could, you know, tell us a little bit more about that, like how you came to write this book and what it means for you.
Absolutely. Thanks. I love that question because it's so multi-stranded. And I suppose maybe for any long-term project, we all have these sort of multi-stranded motivations that change over time. I'm thinking at the very beginning, back in 2012, I needed a topic for a master's thesis for my program in Buddhist studies and Buddhist chaplaincy. And then part of my motivation was just a sense of loneliness and confusion. You know, I'd read that American Buddhists, who are only about 1% of the population, but nonetheless, more than 2/3 of them are of Asian heritage. And it really confused me why in a lot of scholarship that I read or in more mainstream depictions, why I never really saw Asian voices or faces represented. So there was that piece. And it was also just kind of lonely as a young adult Asian American Buddhist because I didn't grow up in a Buddhist tradition. So unlike some of the people I ended up meeting through this project who did grow up, you know, in predominantly Asian Buddhist temple communities or families, that wasn't sort of a privilege that I had growing up. So that got me started on interviewing people. And I really thought no one was going to talk to me. So I wasn't actually even thinking about writing a book at that point. I just thought, oh, maybe a few people will talk to me and it'll be enough for an MA thesis. And by the time I talked to 26 people in person and then 63 more people wanted to do email interviews with me, I sort of realized, oh, I think this has to be a book, unfortunately. That's a lot of work. And I think my motivation at that point, I'd say it probably shifted. I think it shifted from to one of maybe being inspired by just respect for these voices. You know, I didn't agree with everyone I talked to, but it just felt really important to put them together on a page and let other people hear these voices. And then also friendships that developed out of this project and that continue. And I would be, I think, remiss not to mention Ann Glieg, who people who've read the book understand how deeply woven he is into this project from beginning to end. He was someone who back in 2009 started this blog called The Angry Asian Buddhist. And people who knew Aaron knew that, if he was angry, it was an anger that came out of just a deep love for his Buddhist communities. He was half Asian, half Ashkenazi Jewish, and he was just one of the first people to talk about the importance of just even looking at Asian American Buddhists, and even more broadly, he was bringing up conversations about race and representation in American Buddhism at a time when that was still, I think, very, unlike now, still very avoided. So, we recently heard the news that Lions Roar is hiring 2 associate editors to focus on Black Buddhist experience and also Asian American Buddhist experience. And to me, I see a direct line between Aaron being a thorn in the side of Buddhist magazine 10, 15 years ago, and then these sorts of, really glad to see these changes. There's a lot more work to be done, but Aaron was a huge part of this book.
Yeah, I really, you mentioned love that Aaron had, and I really just felt there's so much love in your book. There's so many voices, like it's your name on the cover, as it should be, because you've done this, amazing task. But there's so many voices that you kind of introduce us to. And so as a kind of ethnographic kind of nerd, I was so impressed by the amount of interviews that you did. Can you tell us a little bit about the interviews, like how many you actually did, the location, and the kind of friendships formed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I mentioned I did 89 interviews. 26 of those were in person. The interviews are between an hour and a half and 5.5 hours long, so people had a lot to say. I recorded all of those. I got carpal tunnel transcribing all of them, and then I expanded it out to email interviews, which that was honestly just because I was at the limit of my capacity. I didn't have research funding. I couldn't fly over, the country or the world to meet people who wanted to talk to me. So, I certainly lost something in adapting it for an email format, but I also think I gained something in terms of geographic reach, and also in terms of, some people don't have the time or the ability to kind of sit through such a long interview. So that in and of itself felt really extraordinary, to have such a diversity of viewpoints. And I like to say, even though I was very much inspired by sociologists of religion, by ethnographers, like Sharon Sue and Carolyn Chen and Wendy Cadge and yourself, I don't really think of the book as a work of sociology, in the sense I'm not, I wasn't setting out to be representative. I just wanted to find people to talk to and explore together, what does it mean to be Asian American and Buddhist, this sort of doubly marginalized in a way, or doubly minoritized anyway in this country category, racially and religiously. And there's a way in which I felt that people often spoke about Asian American Buddhists as a category, especially in contrast to white convert Buddhists, but there was so little of us just speaking for ourselves or on our own terms. And so I think of those interviews as perhaps a lot of it was creating a kind of space to build trust and rapport. I remember at one point someone was looking kind of tense. I had they were at my kitchen table and I had the vegan cookies set out. And then I would just ask them if they had any questions before we started. And they were saying are you Christian? It's oh, no, I'm not Christian. Even though I do go to a school called the Graduate Theological Union, I'm Buddhist. And I think it was a bit like in chaplaincy training, doing spiritual care. The focus is on the other person, but if someone asks me a question about myself, I'm happy to be open and share. And I just noticed that person just completely, relaxed. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not saying that, only an Asian American Buddhist could do this project, far from it, but I think it was just a reminder that these topics can be really challenging to talk about, remain difficult. Religion, race, these are really thorny and difficult issues. So I did my best to kind of create the space to just invite people to share what came up for them. And I kind of met them where they were at. So that's why, for Supraja, that was at the Sunnyvale, at a cafe in Sunnyvale, or for Kiet, that was in the San Jose Library, for Alton, that was at a lawn at UC Berkeley, right? For Michael in Southern California, it was in his family home where his parents and his siblings live. And we did the whole interview with this 3-tiered altar in the background. And wow. So it was actually really fun to be able to meet people in different spaces and learn a bit more, especially since, I didn't get the advantage you have when you do like a deep ethnography in a specific place, like over the span of a year or something. But I couldn't have done that because I was reading the sociologists of religion saying, the young people aren't necessarily all coming to temple. So I had to take this more decentralized approach to find them where they were at.
Yeah, I mean, it's just extraordinary that you have both the kind of scale, like 89 interviews is an extraordinary amount of interviews, especially of that length. I mean, I'm just imagining mountains and mountains of transcribes. But you've got that scale, but they're also so intimate. You've also got just a kind of intimacy that you would maybe expect more from, just doing a one site, kind of study. So I just want to kind of really celebrate you for managing both to give us like the variety and also the intimacy. I just think is really extraordinary. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question. I want to try and get as many in as possible. I'll try and not hog all the time. So in many ways, thinking about, the erasure of Asian American voices, Asian American Buddhist voices, and this real, the need for them to be represented and spoken. I mean, I think there's just something so powerful about the book. It's an academic contribution. It's an activist contribution. And I think it's really a Buddhist contribution. In many ways, I see your book as a kind of contemporary sutra, which is a Buddhist teaching for the non-Buddhists in the audience. And as you know, there's a tradition of interpreting the title of Buddhist sutras, very like breaking down, the words. So I'm thinking about your title, Be the Refuge, and it really does fit into this lineage. So can you unpack the title for us? Can you give us a commentary on your sutra?
Sure, let me assume the Dharma throne. And thus have I heard at one time. No, that's great. I haven't had someone say that yet. I'm so honored. It's so funny, right? I mean, the cop-out answer would be to say the book is a sort of commentary on its title, which I only think it's funny because we didn't come up with the title till at the maybe about 90% of the way through when I was writing. I wrote it under a different working title. And when the title sort of came together, and the title was, as I think some people in the audience probably know, it was actually the title of the last blog post that Aaron ever wrote. And also, so Aaron had written for a group blog called Dharma Folk. He'd written his own blog called Angry Asian Buddhist. And then when he was diagnosed with cancer and struggling with that, he really wanted to start a new blog called Be the Refuge. So that's one of the sort of multi-stranded layers of why it's called Be the Refuge. But for me, what I really like the title is that it's a challenge, it's an invitation, it's a koan, it's a chant, it's what you want it to be, right? There's a sort of creativeness and a playfulness and an openness to it. I was talking with Koan friends at Buddha Dharma, and we were discussing how, the book is not called Go Meditate Now. And for some people, some of the time, going to meditate it's really important. That is what it looks like for them, to be a refuge for themselves, for other people. But for me, I think part of this book is inviting us to remember Buddhism is so vast and so multi-stranded, so multifaceted, that someone else's refuge looks like making vegetarian food for the Lunar New Year feast at their temple. It looks like, bowing at the altar. It looks like doing interfaith and interracial dialogue with other people. It looks like donating their money and time to environmental justice or social justice causes. It looks like respecting their ancestors and on. And I think, especially in the US, where I think there can be a way that people just reduce Buddhism only to a certain form of seated meditation, I really wanted a title that would open us beyond and think more broadly about what is American Buddhism in this world. What does the practice of it look like? And how can we each realize, those of us who are committed to the tradition in some way, how are we playing our part in how it's presented and how we practice it, and how we find ourselves in, I think, kinship to our fellow Buddhist practitioners, particularly those whom we might not know as much about or aren't traveling in our familiar circles.
Oh, I really love that. I think it's really beautiful. Like, what is Be the Refuge for you? I think it is like a practice invitation. So thank you for that beautiful unpacking. So more analytic. I'm going to go more analytic now. So one of the main targets of your book is, the two Buddhism typology. Can you explain the limits of the two Buddhism typology and how your research kind of exposes and explodes that typology?
Yeah, so this question comes up a lot, I think, and especially from scholars, right? Because what's really interesting, like the field of American Buddhist studies has been so defined of talking about this idea that there are Asian immigrant Buddhists and then white convert Buddhists, and many people, like pretty much when I talk about it in the book, I'm like, please read Ann's American Dharma. She does a great summary of it. So, I mean, what's funny is I realized I was just looking back through my interview protocol, which is in Appendix 2 of the book. I never explicitly talked about two Buddhisms with my interviewees. I asked people, how would you categorize American Buddhism if you had to categorize, and just kind of listen to what they had to say. And I feel like and I say that because it felt actually important in a way not to center this two Buddhisms dichotomy. I think like kind of organically people could see some of the value in like, yeah, on the surface, there are these Asian immigrant temples, and then there are these like primarily white meditation communities, but just quite organically, people would also ask, so what about our friends who are mixed race, or myself, who, like not me, myself, but like Erin, who's mixed race, or other people who are mixed race. What about our Black and Latinx and Indigenous Buddhist friends? Where do they fit? What about Asian American converts? Where do they fit? And then they would ask, isn't this kind of like flattening for both Asians and white people? So I think that there was just like a natural desire to, perhaps this is something kind of more generational, but to really think more intersectionally and to bring in, race, but also sexuality and gender and class and these other issues. So it just seemed like it almost like didn't need to be a target, because in people's own lives, they lived, such an intersectional Buddhism. And I would admit, like, probably my master's thesis was a bit too like, arg, like two Buddhisms. And then I just kind of realized like, oh, well, centering the voices actually creates a completely different effect. That was, it was just really interesting to explore that.
That's amazing. I mean, it just really illuminates the inadequacy of some of these frameworks that we kind of labor under and construct as academics. And I love the dimensionality that you kind of that you talk about. And I'm really glad that you mentioned intersectionality, because one of my actual favorite quotes in the book was, we do not, quote, this is a quote, we do not fit easily into two Buddhisms because what we live is an intersectional Buddhism. And even though, you said that you didn't focus intentionally on gender, sexuality, and class as kind of central focuses, I felt like the intersectionality of those categories really came through. So I wondered if you had, anything more to share about the intersectionalities of your interlocutors and friends.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember when I was creating my interview questions, and then it was 7 sections. I was so greedy. It was a completely immoderate number of questions. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'd love to talk about gender and sexuality in class. And I was like, this is like it was already too much. It really was. Some people looked like they were ready to strangle me like about 3 hours in, like, really? We're on section 6 and this is not the last section. It's like, I'm so sorry. So I was really glad to see that people were comfortable enough to, I think, share kind of quite, I don't know, I think again, it came up organically because it was part of their, their Buddhist experience. There's, I'm not sure I'll be able to find it. I have all my little like tabs here. There's like a really great quote. I mean, if we're just thinking about class from, let's see if I can find it, from Joshua, who talks about how, I think here it is. So this is an interviewee who says, I worry about American Buddhism turning into an upper middle class way. I should add that for me, this topic brings up issues of class as much as it does race. The two problems are, of course, deeply intertwined in American history and culture. I am just as alienated from mainstream American Dharma as an indebted member of the working class as I am as an Asian American, and for many of the same reasons. So, I mean, people just had such, thoughtful ways that they brought in, right, gender, sexuality, because it just sort of came up for them. And actually, this recently I was reading a article by Xiaolan Hu, our wonderful colleague, yes, on queering identities. And Dr. Hu was using queering in a kind of verb sense, in the sense of kind of disrupting our notions of like attaching to identity as a sort of like stable, fixed entity. And I just found that article to be really powerful, in the sense that rather than seeing this sort of queering as a kind of deficit or a source of shame, it was really about seeing that as a resource and a richness, as a source of resilience. And I actually thought, like, even if, certainly not everyone in the book explicitly identifies as queer, but I think there's something about familiar with being in like marginal positions and having to sort of code switch between dominant and non-dominant places. And what Shalan was writing was that actually what like in the classroom, it seems that actually people who come from these multiple positionalities are actually more open to learning about different experiences. And so I think that there's a beautiful way in which the interviewees I spoke to really, I think just like modeled a kind of what does it look like to listen very deeply to other perspectives, just be curious about others' perspectives and like want to hear them, to have a kind of humility about the limits of one's own perspective. It's such a great question. I don't want to ramble on, but those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah, no, that's such a powerful piece by Xiaolan Hu. And I can really see what a natural conversation, like how it really fits with your work as well. Your interlocutors and their work really comes together well. And I love this sense of kind of, the different spaces of marginality being, possibilities for bridges and kind of solidarity between, participants. And there's just like a real kind of like a friendship, a possibility for friendship across lines that I just get so much like joy from. And I love how you talk about these categories. Like you always lead with lived experience. You never lead with these like heavy kind of reified categories, so I really love that, and just want to kind of celebrate that. Okay, so I'm going to move into a question about social justice, which is really kind of hot topic of conversation. You had so many rich reflections from your interlocutors on the relationship between Buddhism and social justice. And as I, read through the book, I kind of noted, three kind of distinct positions. Sometimes they kind of meld and merge. But one was a kind of identification between Buddhism and social justice. The second one was a sense that they were distinct but complementary, and kind of putting them into conversation. And then a third was also an acknowledgement that there are some places in which there's, tensions. So I wondered if you can maybe give some examples of, whether, how you saw, if that kind of sounded about right to you, and some examples of those positions.
Yeah, I really appreciate you just, naming that. I think it's like just a reminder that Asian American Buddhists are not monolithic and don't look at the same topic, in agreement, which I think that, sometimes being a minority in this country, I think can create a sense like I've got to be like friends and like agree with everyone who shares this view, which like is ridiculous. Like I think if I was in Asia, I would not be like, I need to be friends and agree with every single person around me. Or like, I don't think white people walk around saying like, I need to be friends and agree, but there is something about like the pressure of being a minority. This is a multi-layered and complex that creates that. And I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There are people for who really like the way they relate to Buddhism is like just deeply sort of like they can't disentangle it from social justice. I'm thinking of some people in the East Bay Meditation Center community. I'm also thinking of someone in the book who's Sri Lankan Sinhalese Buddhist who just feels like, to them, like maybe they see the Buddhist as someone who was a revolutionary who was throwing off caste systems, fighting for these issues. And then you have people for whom they're a little bit more distinct, like they see they have Buddhist commitments, they have social justice commitments. If there's a Venn diagram, there's a little bit of overlap in the middle, right? But there's also like areas where perhaps they don't always completely overlap. And I think that, not surprisingly, like, and like, I think it's also important to remember, like, I'm not saying there's a normative, like, people should care about social justice or even should care about Asian American Buddhist identity. Something that was fun about doing this project was when I looked for interviewees, I was trying to language it in a way so that it was really broad. Like, I would say, like, when I say Asian American, I mean, like, if you have any Asian heritage from like anywhere on the continent of Asia. So like I had people from like West Asia and Central Asia, people who are of partial Asian heritage. Like, you don't have to like openly identify as a Buddhist. Like, just if you feel some kind of interest in Buddhism, I'd be so happy to talk to you. And I'm really glad I did that, because I think it actually, some of the most interesting conversations were some of the reasons why people might not feel as aligned with the label of Asian American, or why they might not be very comfortable publicly identifying as Buddhist. Anyway, sorry, I've veered slightly.
No, it was brilliant.
Your third, let me think about your, in the third one, in terms of some tensions, I think that is particularly interesting. I think Detunu in the book really illustrates this well as a Sri Lankan Sinhalese Buddhist. And I think what she represents is something that I think is kind of a strength I saw among second generation Buddhists, so people for whom their parents were Buddhist and immigrated to this country. But I think there's a way in which second generation Buddhists in particular have had to kind of think more transnationally about Buddhism. It's not such an American-centric view of Buddhism. In other words, Detunu was talking about, like, here I'm in the US, and it's not like that comfortable to see when Buddhism in the US is only presented through white voices, right? And her home, her main community is obviously not majority white. At the same time, she's also like holding in her mind Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka and like being very concerned about that. So I think there's a way in which, at least for the people I spoke to, they're really cautious to like not want, like a white Buddhist superiority complex is not helpful. I read this in the book, but neither is an Asian Buddhist superiority complex. So I think there's just a sensitivity that struck me there. And there was a tension. So for Detunu, she really struggled sometimes to like reconcile her Buddhist beliefs, Buddhist practices, around karma, around anatta, not no self or not self, and then around her own social justice commitments. And I think, I'm not sure the book has answers for this, but I wanted to show that there are people asking these questions. And sometimes the comfort, Andy, another interview, I love what he said. He's like, hey, it's so comforting just to like have a space where it's like, hey, like we're all trying to figure this out together. We don't have the answers, but you're not alone in asking these questions and grappling and maybe struggling with these questions.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned those two case studies, because they also stood out for me as well. And I loved how you gave the space for them to, work through all their complexities. Like, again, you like over and over, I just kept on thinking there's so much dimensionality in this book. There's so much dimensionality, which can be hard because, it's easier to be, sometimes it's easier to like stay in the lines, to color in the lines. It's like, to organize material, it's like put them in these categories. And there was just so much like complexity and nuance and dimensionality in your, with your interlocutors, which is a reflection of their complexity and nuance, but it's also a reflection on your skill as a writer for, really bringing the fullness of them to the page. And I'm really glad that we you kind of landed on this notion of having the space to do this together. So that's a really nice segue to my next question, which is in the final section of the book, which is called Refuge Makers, really beautiful. It draws from the voices of your interviewees, and then I'm going to quote you, to explore the possibilities of a pan-ethnic, pan-sectarian, Asian American Buddhist identity, end quote. And then you move into a quote from Aaron, in which he shares, blogs are not enough. We need to have conferences. We need to have podcasts. We need to be at parades, which I loved. We need to be talking to other faiths. That's what building a space is. So I was curious about, like, how do you see these spaces emerging? Like, what's your sense of, of these refuge spaces happening.
Yeah, I think that's a quote by Andy, actually, who was
Oh,
inspired by
sorry.
Aaron. No, don't apologize,
Sorry,
but I
Andy.
think it was Andy inspired by
Oh.
Aaron. And no, it's such a great quote. I mean, these spaces have been in the one sense, we can say these spaces have been around for multiple generations. I mean, we can just have to look at our, Shin Buddhist friends to see how they've generation after generation made Buddhism relevant for the newest generation, had to keep adapting it. And I think that for, thinking about second generation Buddhists, on just this Saturday, actually, I'll be speaking with Andy, and who helps run a youth group over on the East Coast in New Jersey, as well as Wan, who's featured in the book as a filmmaker of youth group. Is the title of the film, the documentary that she made, which is a beautiful, beautiful documentary. And John Gill will be hosting us, John Gill and the Boca Group. So Boca is this youth group that is, very much featured in part 2 of the book. So, I mean, I see them already as creating these spaces for Asian American Buddhists. So also, and they have non-Asian Buddhists in their community as well. But for them to talk about what it means to be young and coming of age and grappling with their religious identities, I think there's still a long way to go. Even I'm thinking about podcasts. I know there are some podcasts in the Shin Buddhist communities, but even just looking at Buddhist podcasts recently, very few seem to feature guests like myself who are not white and, not a professor, not a meditation teacher. I mean, I'm just saying guests, I don't know, to say nothing about even who is hosting these. So it's been really interesting to see who holds these sort of platforms of power. In terms of, where we get to share about our message of what American Buddhism's true diversity really looks like. And I guess I would also just say I really loved Noel's quote in the book. So I'm very indebted to him because he's the person who helped me think through this. Actually, indirectly, he inspired the structure for this book in terms of thinking about generations. And that's when he talked about, I've got my Japanese American friends in the Shin Buddhist tradition. They're multi-generation Buddhists. And then I have my Cambodian and Thai and Lao and Taiwanese, etc., Buddhist friends who are kind of these second generation Buddhists. And he's like, I'm kind of like a first gen Buddhist, is what he said, because he's Filipino and he grew up Catholic, right? And I just never thought of the term first gen that way. And it really worked because a lot of the people I spoke to who were converts like myself, we kept putting converts in air quotes because of the way it's assumed that it's white, or maybe it means you want to dump your cultural baggage, or it's just kind of a freighted word. And so when Noel brought up first gen, it's oh, that this is so brilliant. I really want to figure out how to incorporate this. And it turned out to be a key to the structure of the whole book. But he also said, it's just really important for Asian Americans of all faiths, of no faith, to be in all sectors of society at all levels. I mean, that's what will really help eliminate a lot of these stereotypes and assumptions, right? And I reflect on that a lot. I think about what it means to create these spaces, to not always be a guest on someone's podcast, but to host their own, right? And I know there are efforts to create some broader Asian American Buddhist retreats and conferences, and that's really exciting to me. I know Aaron really dreamed of that, to bring in people from different Asian heritage backgrounds, to bring in people from different Buddhist backgrounds. It can be really hard for a lot of reasons to bridge those boundaries and those gaps. And what's exciting to me is imagining you can kind of create this broad conference, and I imagine within that conference you end up getting sort of affinity groups within affinity groups. I don't know if you have East Asians and South Asians and Southeast Asians. I know Spirit Rock is having a Desi Dharma retreat, and I'm oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner, honestly, something like that. And I for people who are adopted, Asian Americans who are adopted, right, or mixed race Asian Americans. And I imagine, you can think of an analogous situation for Black Buddhists, right? Black is not a monolith either. What does it mean to look at people who are first generation immigrants from a country in Africa, right, versus second generation or descendants of slaves, that sort of thing. So I think that we just need more of these spaces. This book is just such a tiny part of this big picture. And I hope it can spark more of these conversations and encourage people to create these spaces.
Oh, I think it already is. And definitely you have parades. That's a really important part. I love the joy. I love the joy in the quote. I thought it was like really lifted me. So I'm just keeping my eye on the time. I know I have to share you with the audience, which I really don't want to. I want to keep you for myself because it's just such a rich conversation. I'll just ask you one very short question. So one of the striking features of the book is how it functions on so many levels, as scholarship, as activism, as memoir, as a sutra. I'm just curious as to like how did it impact you? How did writing this book? How did holding the book in your hand? Like how's it been for you, this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the journey is still like very much continuing. I think about the way this is kind of a silly metaphor, but like when I was a chaplain in the hospital in Oakland, there is this like jewel tone, not this exact sweater, but it was jewel tone and it was purple. And I really liked wearing it, but for some reason I was like very self-conscious wearing it. I'm like, does this make me look like Barney? Like, is this like way too happy? Like, because, people are in really like intense situations. And then, but what ended up happening was just, I liked the color and people would comment on it. They're like, that's just, that color is bold. And they would just think like, I'm really happy to see this color in the hospital, reminding me of like the life outside these hospital walls. And I bring this up because I feel like before I treated Asian American Buddhist identity, like my fears about the sweater, it was like, I feared that the label was one that would ostracize me and that just would, like I was very uncomfortable with the label. And I think it was through the process of writing this book and talking to so many people that actually it became like a sweater that I want to wear. Like, it's not a sweater I have to wear all the time. I'm not like sleeping in it. Like, it's, like to set it aside from time to time. It's not pertinent. Like when I'm with my parents at their home, they're not Buddhist. I'm speaking like Shanghainese with my dad and Mandarin with my mom, and we're just eating food. And I'm not thinking about being an Asian American Buddhist, but it's been really lovely to feel like it's actually a label, a category that can be a source of connection and connection with not just other Asian American Buddhists, but like across racial boundaries. Even, like at a previous event, there's someone who's Asian American Christian who just wrote this beautiful comment as well about wanting to form more bridges. So I think that sort of sense of expansive possibility is not, the loneliness and confusion I started with. It's come a long ways happily from there.
Oh, I absolutely love that metaphor. It's like joy and comfort in your sweater. It's really beautiful. I will now always think of you in that purple sweater. All right. Well, I have to stop being greedy, and I'm going to look at the questions now and share the questions from the audience. So, just for the audience, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat box, and I will ask them for you. Okay, so this is a question from Daigan, who I think you know from San Francisco, yes. A friend, I think, of both of ours. And his question is, in terms of opening up spaces, what kind of things would you like to see change in the future? Do you feel safe and welcome in predominantly white Buddhist spaces?
Thank you, Daigan. I'm so glad you're here with us. Yeah, that's a really great question. Many, many strands to that. It's really heartening to see I think a lot more conversations about race or people confronting race just across Buddhist communities. I see that start to happen a lot more than in the past. I would love it. The pandemic makes it so hard, but I would just love to see more people going to different communities outside of what they're familiar with, particularly to people maybe who are in predominantly white meditation spaces. What is it like to go to your local, primarily Asian temple? Maybe you don't understand the language, but I've experienced those as welcoming spaces. Is there a way to find a friend to take you there or go with a friend? I think to actually like visit in person and really spend time in those communities. So I'd really love to see just more of that. And I see colleges do this, like going on field trips and going on visits. And And I think, I wonder if there's a way sanghas can also emulate what some college courses are doing, which is really trying to learn more about the history of Buddhism, even just, the history of Buddhism in America and the many different types of traditions that we have. And Diane, I think you also asked, do I feel safe? I think that through the process of writing this book, I felt more comfortable not fitting in really anywhere. Like there's probably going to be some there, like in any community, right? And my interviews talked about that. Sometimes they didn't feel fully at ease in predominantly white communities, but maybe they also didn't feel fully at ease in their mothers and their grandmothers' temples. Like maybe at the temples, they were afraid of messing something up or being disrespectful or not knowing how to do the chant or something, or not being like authentic enough. And then in a weird way, in white Buddhist spaces, there can also be this fear of like not being authentic enough, right? Because it's like, oh, like the spokespeople for Buddhism in America are predominantly white, or they know like they have all these ways of articulating it that might more quote unquote cultural knowledge may not be as valued. And so I think it's taken some shifting for me to understand, like there are so many people who really like want to learn more about different forms of Buddhism, and trying to start from that space, kind of like what Anne was saying earlier about friendship. What does it mean to like build a sense of friendship and to incorporate a kind of critical analysis of race of the issues that are pertinent to this day, and to be in like ongoing dialogue to build relationship together and to build coalition together. That just takes a lot of time, and it takes time, and a lot of labor is involved. So I think it has to be a joyful process, and there has to be some forgiveness in it too. Like people will inadvertently hurt others, or maybe say comments that don't land quite right. But is there a way to like talk that out, and then hopefully ideally in person and not just on social media, and try to create those spaces? So I don't think I have all the answers, but it's been exciting to see. I think even people are doing our best with our online spaces to generate both like affinity groups for specific groups, but also groups that are open and people from a lot of different backgrounds are in dialogue together.
Thank you. I just also wanted to tell everyone you wrote a fantastic piece. I think it was for Tricycle, on your experience of returning from Thailand from COVID. What's the title? Please tell us.
I think it's called. It's a quote from a Thai friend of ours. It was stay safe both from the virus and the racism. Yeah.
So I really encourage everyone to look up that wonderful, powerful piece as well. Okay, I'm going to get back to the question. Sorry. Okay. That I guess that sorry, I've got that wasn't. Oh, sorry. So that question that I said was from Daigan, wasn't from Daigan. Sorry, the Daigan's question is actually underneath. So apologies to Daigan, but whoever asked that question, thank you. So Daigan's question is: I really loved how you mixed the stories of folks you interviewed with your own journey and practice. What do you hope white Buddhists could practice with? Hopefully I got that question right. That's what I'm seeing. I'm wondering if I got the whole question.
I guess very selfishly sit with the book and read the voices in the book, because it can say more than I can in this limited time. But to be really honest, I've been really moved by a lot of letters from readers from all different racial backgrounds, and including from white readers who are saying that this is really opening them to a whole dimension of American Buddhism that they were not as aware of. And I'm touched. I mean, I hope that there is a space to sit with these voices and then have it be an ongoing exploration, just the way our Buddhist practices are ongoing explorations. I think it's the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And what does it mean to really build a wider and more inclusive Sangha? I think I've been touched by people who've been willing to be made uncomfortable by the book and realize like, oh, I realize I don't actually, I've been saying this certain thing that I really don't want to speak in this way anymore, or making certain assumptions. And in the same way, I've also been really grateful for reader feedback for myself, because like I'm constantly learning, even through the reception of the book and through the questions and being asked and through the comments people are providing at events. So I hope that answers your question, Daigan, or at least begins to get at it.
I would just echo that I think all sanghas should buy this book and sit with it as a practice text. Like what you said, like, what does it mean to be the refuge? Okay, I'm going back to the questions, promise. Okay, so you've got a note of gratitude. So this is Jennifer Aquino. Sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Just wanted to say congratulations. I loved reading Be the Refuge. So next question.
I just have to say,
yeah.
Jennifer is the audiobook reader.
Oh.
And so there's an audiobook. I'm so touched and excited that she's here. I think this is probably the first time we're making that knowledge public knowledge. But yes, I'm so excited. Jennifer has an incredible voice, and it is unbelievable to have an Asian American woman narrate the audiobook. Someone who knows if I'm not mistaken, Chinese and Japanese and Spanish and Tagalog as a Filipina. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you for literally giving voice to Be the Refuge.
Oh, wonderful. Let's see the next question. Sorry, the questions are popping up in a strange order. Okay, this is a good one. What future projects do you have in mind?
Oh, and I also see, how is your book being received, right, as part of that question.
Yeah, and that's the next part.
Okay, future. I'm kind of like a serial monogamist when it comes to projects. Like, I really wish I could be a little more like polygamous about it and do multiple projects at once. So my current project that I'm trying really hard to finish is a memoir that's about Buddhist chaplaincy and grief and spiritual friendship. And I think of it as a kind of companion piece to this, although it's in a completely different style and it's not academic. And then the future projects, I'll have to wait until after the memoir.
Oh, that's really exciting. A memoir to look forward to. Oh, and then how is the book being received?
I think, like I've said, it's a bit like, I don't have children, but I imagine if I had a child, like, I would be more comforted to know like they have a few like close friends who really care for them than like 1,000 Instagram followers, right? Probably like 1,000 is not even a right number to quote. I don't know if I should be saying 10,000 or something, but I feel like, I like authors never really know how a lot of it is invisible, sort of like what kind of impact it's having. But through these, I think, really touching just emails from readers, it feels like, I don't know, I feel, I guess, so lucky that the kind of thought and care that went into the book is it's just being received by such thoughtful people and such caring people who are really taking it deeply to heart and really kind of trying to incorporate it into their lives and into their practice. So I think positively, and there's a lot of different additional events, just visits to different sanghas, and also it's being used in college classrooms as well as high school classrooms, which I think is really exciting. So it's a bit of a hybrid book, and it's fun to see that it seems to be slowly making its way to different spaces, and including, outside the US. It's always really fun to get letters from people outside the US. And if anyone out there is listening and it's like 2 a.m. for you, thank you for being here with us.
Well, academics are raving about your book. I can definitely tell you that. I think, again, I love your metaphor of the few close friends instead of all the Instagram followers. But sometimes we've got a lot of friends on Instagram who are also close. So I think you've got both the intimacy and a lot of fans for your book. Okay, let's see these questions. I feel like I'm doing a very good job. Okay, this is a great comment from Alexis Burdett. And the comment is, more people will have purple sweaters because of you.
Hooray!
I can see a parade with a purple float in your future. Yes. Oh,
and actually, like, speaking of purple, this is not intentional, but it is a color that's the logo of the Buddhist Churches of America, which is obviously big in the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist community. So I kind of love that it makes me feel like there's kind of a deep Buddhist heritage to the color as well.
Oh, that is
quite by coincidence.
Or not. Synchronicity or great. Okay, let's see. So I think we covered the questions. We've got a few minutes left. Is there anything that you would like to share? Like, would you like to share that we didn't cover with the listeners?
Oh my gosh, I know there's that's always the hardest
Hard
question. Like
question, sorry.
what else can we share? Um I guess something that I didn't know whether I wanted to bring this up today, but I think I do. I mean, because I've been thinking a lot about just Black Lives Matter and about that kind of solidarity. And I think maybe just an invitation. I've been really wanting to have kind of more honest and also like friendly, I don't know, like both friendly and like non-violent conversations in this space, because it's very, very charged. It's obviously really in the news. And, I've been thinking about how today was the first day of the Black and Buddhist Summit,
Yeah, I was
which is a
thinking
week
that too.
long, which is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to having some conversations with Ruth King and Pamela Ayo Yetunde. We've been sort of in email contact, and I'm thinking about like Ruth's book, Mindful of Race, and how in it, she talks about at one point the kind of what she's noticed, as a Black teacher in some BIPOC spaces, that there's a lot of people who really want to honor and respect and uplift Black voices, but are also struggling to, if they identify as POC or Black, but aren't, or sorry, POC but not Black, like how they can do that, but also still center their own histories and voices. And I think that's really an ongoing question. I've been hearing that more from Asian American Buddhists, because the category Asian American is so confusing. It can be so fractured, I mean, like when people say Black and brown, like, do we include South Asians because they're more darker? I mean, like, you get into skin color, it gets very confusing. So there's ways in which reporting about race in America can like completely erase Asian Americans. And I think that it can be really confusing for Asian Americans who like want to be in solidarity, but also want to understand, like, how do I bring what I know, the languages and cultures I know, to the conversation? How do we learn from each other so it's more multi-directional and it's not just a unidirectional space? So I guess I just wanted to name that that's been like on my mind and on my heart, and I've been hearing people talk about it as well. And I hope we'll continue to be able to build conversations and think about new metaphors and even new ways of presenting ourselves, because I think in a time where so much of, like, if we aren't getting the inputs of just being in embodied community with people, we're getting a lot of media, but the media shapes the way we understand ourselves and the way we understand race. And sometimes, like, I feel like I have to like restrict my media diet and realize, like, wait, like this is creating, like certain fractures, or this is not the only way to think about these issues.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that, it sounds like you're already starting to have conversations, into the complexity of that with really, thoughtful, Buddhist, like Black Buddhists. And I also just want to say that you're someone on social media that I really respect. They're very gracious on social media. And I really like how you manage your social media presence, which is not easy at this time. As you say, it's a challenge.
I'm like a complete Luddite, so I just have no idea what I'm doing. It takes me like 2 hours. I'm like, how do I write one sentence on social media? I think at one point, I feel like one of the first times we interacted, I told you this, and I was like, I couldn't figure out how to like write a comment and also post a video. And you were like, I was like, I'm like a grandma, and you're like, no, my grandma is way better than this or something. So thank you. Yeah. No, I guess that also makes me want to just say briefly that I hope that the book, I think of this as a kind of like, I've been calling it a bit of an anti-celebrity book, because to me, it's a miracle. Like, I'm so grateful North Atlantic Books was willing to publish this, because I do not have a platform. I do not have a social media following. I'm just a Buddhist layperson, like trying to figure out these questions and having conversations with each other. And there's so much power in that. And I hope that, when Aaron started the blog Be the Refuge, I think of like us all as continuing his legacy. I was just talking to the journalist Caitlin Kendall, who writes at the intersection of race and religion. She actually knew Aaron from like back in 2006, or even before then. They were when Aaron was in Chicago for his grad school, and she's like, wow, he's been talking about these issues for so long, and I think even now he's touching people through the book. And it's sort of like collectively together we can carry on his legacy. And also I see us collectively like writing the blog that he wanted to see happen, but we're writing it like some of us are writing it by writing on blogs or on social media, but some of us are writing it just by how we're acting or how we speak or how we show up for our families, for our friends, for our communities. So I guess I just want to thank the audience again for being here with us and acknowledge just all the work that I know everyone in the audience is doing and for sharing this time with us.
And I just wanted to thank you both. What a fantastic conversation. Seriously, amazing. And just to tell you that I'm really excited about this book. I'm so grateful that it exists because I feel that it is so timely and it really fills a unique niche. And the fact that we can carry it in a mainstream bookstore, I think is fantastic, that we can put it in the hands of people that are looking for something like this, I think is wonderful. I spent the whole day today at a book selling conference called Winter Institute. And actually, there were so many conversations around diversity and around race and around inclusivity and changing the bookstore staff. And so there's a great feeling of hopefulness that I have today, especially. I also wanted to add that I love purple.
You started, it's one of my favorite colors.
Today's evening has been brought to you by the color purple.
Prince. I just have to say the king's name, Prince.
So excited about the memoir. And when you're ready with that, I think we can help. Find a publisher. Seriously, I know publishers that would be very interested in your work. So thank you to both of you. Thank you to everyone watching from everywhere. I'll remind you again, if you don't already have a copy of the book, you need to press the green button at the bottom of the screen. Maybe we'll change it to purple, but please press it and go ahead and order. We'll be shipping that out to you straight away. And we also have curbside pickup. If you're more comfortable with that and you're in Miami, please come by and just stay safe, stay well, keep doing the wonderful work that you're doing. And it was truly a pleasure to host you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.